friends! Today I'm going to be reading to you chapters 3 and 4 from our book, Stone Fox. So, we're going to jump right in. It's easy to tell when it's winter in Wyoming. There is snow on everything, the trees, the houses, the roads, the fields, and even the people. If they stay outside long enough, that is. It's not a dirty snow. It's a clean, soft snow that rests like a blanket over the entire state. The air is clear and crisp, and the rivers are all frozen. It's fun to be outdoors and see the snowflakes float down past the brim of your hat and hear the squeak of the fresh powder under your boots. Winter in Wyoming can be the most beautiful time of year, if you're ready for it. Little Willie was ready. He had chopped enough wood. They would not be cold. He had stocked enough food. They would not go hungry. He had asked Lester at the general store how much food Grandfather had bought last year. Then he had purchased the same amount. This would be more than enough because Grandfather wasn't eating very much these days. The coming of snow as early as October also meant the coming of school. But little Willie didn't mind. He liked school. However, his teacher, Miss Williams, had told Grandfather once, "Far as I'm concerned, that boy of yours just asked too many questions." Grandfather had just laughed and said, "How's he going to learn if he don't ask?" That's what I want to know too. Okay, sorry, back to the book. Then later, Grandfather had said to little Willie, "If your teacher don't know, you ask me. If I don't know, then you've really got yourself a good question." Grandfather had taught little Willie a lot, but now little Willie was on his own. Each morning he would get up and make a fire. Then he would make oatmeal mush for breakfast. He ate it, Searchlight ate it, Grandfather ate it. He would feed Grandfather a spoonful at a time. After breakfast, little Willie would hitch up Searchlight to the sled. It was an old wooden sled that Grandfather had brought from the Indians. It was so light that little Willie could pick it up with one hand, but it was strong and sturdy. Little Willie rode on the sled standing up, and Searchlight would pull him 5 miles across the snow-covered countryside to the schoolhouse, which was located on the outskirts of town. Searchlight loved the snow. She would wait patiently outside the schoolhouse all day long, and little Willie never missed a chance to run out between classes and play with his friend. After school, they would go into town of Jackson and run errands. They would pick up supplies at Lester's general store or go to the post office. Or to the bank. Little Willie had $50 in a savings account at the bank. Every month, Grandfather had deposited the money little Willie had earned working on the farm. "Don't thank me," Grandfather would say. "You earned it. You're a good little worker, and I'm proud of you." Grandfather wanted little Willie to go to college and become educated. All little Willie wanted to do was grow potatoes, but he respected his grandfather enough to do whatever he said. If there were no errands to run that day, Searchlight would just pull little Willie up and down Main Street. Little Willie loved to look at all the people, especially the city slickers, as Grandfather called them. "Why, they didn't know a potato from a peanut," Grandfather said, and their hands were as pink and soft as a baby's. You couldn't miss the city slickers. They were the ones who looked as if they were going to a wedding. At a little before 6 each day, little Willie would position his sled in front of the old church on Main Street. Today, again, he waited, eyes glued on the big church clock that loomed high overhead. Searchlight waited too, ears perked up, eyes alert, legs slightly bent, ready for spring forward. Bong! At the first stroke of 6, Searchlight lunged forward with such force that little Willie was almost thrown from the sled. Straight down Main Street they went, the sled runners barely touching the snow. They were one big blur as they turned right onto North Road, and they were almost out of town before the church clock became silent again. "Go, Searchlight, go!" little Willie's voice sang out across the snowy twilight. And did Searchlight go? She had run this race 100 times before, and she knew the whereabouts of every fallen tree and hidden gully. This enabled her to travel at tremendous speed, even though it was getting dark and more dangerous. Little Willie sucked in the cool night air and felt the sting of the wind against his face. It was a race, all right, a race against time, a race against themselves, a race they always won. The small building up ahead was Grandfather's farmhouse. When Searchlight saw it, she seemed to gather up every ounce of her remaining strength. She forged ahead with such speed that the sled seemed to lift up off the ground and fly. They were so exhausted when they arrived at the house that neither of them noticed the horse tied up outside. Little Willie unhitched Searchlight, and then both of them tumbled over onto their backs in the snow and stared up at the moon. Searchlight had her head on one paw. Let me start over. Searchlight had her head on one paw, and Little Willie's chest was licking the underside of his chin. She had her head on one paw on Little Willie's chest. Ah, now I got it. She had her head on one paw on his chest. It all matters in grammar. Here we go. Searchlight had her head on one paw on Little Willie's chest and was licking the underside of his chin. Little Willie had a hold of Searchlight's ear, and he was grinning. The owner of the horse stood on the front porch and watched them, tapping his foot impatiently. Chapter 4, The Reason. Get over here, the voice cut through the air like the twang of a ratcheting bullet. Little Willie had never heard a voice like that before, not on his farm. He couldn't move, but Searchlight sure could. The owner of the voice barely had time to step back into the house and close the door. Searchlight barked and snarled and jumped at the closed door. Then the door opened a crack. The man stood in the opening. He was holding a small derringer and pointing it at Searchlight. Oh, a derringer. It's a kind of gun. His hand was shaking. Look, I had to use my clues in this picture, or I could have looked up that word in the dictionary. It's just an old-fashioned word for a handgun. Which Miss Gerald probably should know that word, but bless it, y'all, I just couldn't remember it. Don't shoot! Little Willie yelled as he reached out and touched our Searchlight gently on the back. The barking stopped. Who are you? Name's Clifford Snyder, state of Wyoming, the man said with authority. He opened the door a little further. The man was dressed as if he was going to a wedding, a city slicker nonetheless. He was short, with a small head and a thin, droopy mustache that reminded Little Willie of the last time he'd drunk a glass of milk in a hurry. What do you mean? Little Willie asked. Official business. Can't the old man inside talk? Not regular talk. We have a code. I can show you. As Little Willie reached for the door, Clifford Snyder again aimed his gun at Searchlight, who had begun to growl. Leave that thing outside, he demanded. She'll be all right if you put your gun away. No. Are you afraid of her? I'm not afraid. Dogs can always tell when someone's afraid of them. Just get in this house this minute, Clifford Snyder yelled, and his face turned red. Little Willie left Searchlight outside, but Clifford Snyder wouldn't put his gun away until they were all the way into Grandfather's bedroom, and then he insisted that Little Willie shut the door. Grandfather's eyes were wide open and fixed on the ceiling. He looked much older and much more tired than he had this morning. You're no better than other folks, Clifford Snyder began as he lit up a long, thin cigar and blew smoke towards the ceiling. And anyway, it's the law, plain and simple. Little Willie didn't say a thing. He was busy combing Grandfather's hair like he did every day when he got home. When he finished, he held up the mirror so Grandfather could see. I'm warning you, Clifford Snyder continued. If you don't pay, we have our ways, and it's all legal, all fair and legal. You're no better than other folks. Do we owe you money or something, Mr. Snyder? Little Willie asked. Taxes, son. Taxes on this farm. Your grandfather there hasn't been paying them. Little Willie was confused. Taxes? Grandfather had always paid every bill and always on time, and Little Willie did the same. So what was this about taxes? Grandfather had never mentioned them before. There must be some mistake. Is it true? Little Willie asked Grandfather. But Grandfather didn't answer. Apparently, he had gotten worse during the day. He didn't move his hand or even his fingers. Ask him about the letters, piped up Clifford Snyder. What letters? Every year we send a letter, a tax bill, showing how much you owe. I never seen one, insisted Little Willie. Probably threw 'em out. Are you sure? Began Little Willie, and then he remembered the strong box. He removed the boards, lifted the heavy box up onto the floor. He opened it and removed the papers he remembered seeing when he had looked for the money to rent the horse. Are these the letters? He asked. Clifford Snyder snatched the letters from the Little Willie's hand and examined them. Yep, sure are, he said. Those go back over 10 years. He held up one of the letters. This here is the last one we sent. Little Willie looked at the paper. There were so many figures and columns and numbers that he couldn't make any sense out of what he was looking at. How much do we owe you, Mr. Snyder? Says right here, clear as a bell. The short man jabbed his short finger at the bottom of the page. Little Willie's eyes popped open. $500? We owe you $500. Clifford Snyder nodded, rocking forward onto his toes, making himself taller. And if you don't pay, he said, I figured this here farm is just about worth... You can't take our farm away, Little Willie screamed, and Searchlight began barking outside. Oh, yes, we can, Clifford Snyder said, smiling, exposing his yellow, tobacco-stained, gross teeth. He probably smelled awful too, y'all. Chapter 5, The Way. The next day, Little Willie met the situation head on, or at least he wanted to. But he wasn't just quite sure what to do. Well, where was he going to get $500? Grandfather had always said, where there's a will, there's a way. And Little Willie had the will. Now all he had to do was find the way. Of course, of all the stupid things, cried Doc Smith, not paying his taxes? Let this be a lesson to you, Willie. But the potatoes barely bring in enough money to live on, explained Little Willie. We went broke last year. Doesn't matter. Taxes got to be paid whether we like it or not. And believe me, I don't know of anybody who likes it. Then why do we have them in the first place? Because it's the way the state gets its money. Why don't they grow potatoes like Grandfather does? Doc Smith just laughed. They have more important things to do than grow potatoes, she explained. Like what? Like, well, taking care of us. Grandfather says we should take care of our own selves. But not all people can take care of themselves, like the sick, like your grandfather. I can take care of him. He took care of me when my mother died. Now I'm taking care of him. But what if something should happen to you? Oh, Little Willie thought about this. They walked over to the sled, where Searchlight was waiting, Doc Smith's high boots sinking into the soft, white snow with each step. Little Willie brushed the snow off Searchlight's back. Then he asked, Oh, and all this money is the reason Grandfather got sick, isn't it? I believe it is, Willie, she agreed. So if I pay the taxes, Grandfather will get better, won't he? Doc Smith rubbed the wrinkles below her eyes. You just better do what I told you before. Let Mrs. Peacock take care of your grandfather and... But he will. He'll get better, won't he? Yes, I'm sure he would, but child, where are you going to get $500? I don't know, but I will. You'll see. That afternoon, Little Willie stepped into the bank wearing his blue suit and his blue tie. His hair was so slicked down that it looked like wet paint. He asked to see Mr. Forrester. I said that wrong. Mr. Foster, the president of the bank. Mr. Foster was a big man with a big cigar stuck right in the center of his big mouth. When he talked, the cigar bobbled up and down. Little Willie wondered why the ash didn't fall off the end of it. Little Willie showed Mr. Foster the papers from Grandfather's storage box and told him everything Clifford Snyder, the tax man, had said. Sell, Mr. Foster recommended after studying the papers. The cigar bobbled up and down. Sell the farm and pay the taxes. If you don't, they can take the farm away from you. They have the right. I'll be 11 next year. I'll grow more potatoes than anybody ever seen. You'll see. You need $500, Willie. Do you know how much that is? And anyway, there isn't enough time. Of course, the bank could loan you the money, but how could you pay it back? And what about next year? No, I say sell before you end up with nothing. The cigar ash fell onto the desk. I have $50 in my savings account. I'm sorry, Willie, Mr. Foster said as he wiped the ash off onto the floor. As little Willie walked out of the bank with his head down, Searchlight greeted him by placing 2 muddy paws on his chest. Little Willie smiled and grabbed Searchlight around the neck and squeezed her as hard as he could. We'll do it, girl. You and me. We'll find the way. The next day, Little Willie talked to everybody he could think of. He talked with his teacher, Miss Williams. He talked with Lester at the general store. He even talked with Hank, who swept up over at the post office. They all agreed, sell the farm. That was the only answer anybody was giving him. There was only one person left to talk to, if only he could. Should we sell? Little Willie asked. Palm up meant yes. Palm down meant no. Grandfather's hands lay motionless on the bed. Searchlight barked. Grandfather's fingers twitched. That was all. Things looked hopeless. And then Little Willie found the way. He was at Lester's general store when it happened, when he saw the poster. Every February, the National Dog Sled Races were held in Jackson, Wyoming. People came from all over to enter the race, and some of the finest dog teams in the country were represented. It was an open race. Any number of dogs could be entered, even one. The race covered 10 miles of snow-covered countryside, starting and ending on Main Street, right in front of the old church. There was a cash prize for the winner. The amount varied from year to year, but this year it just happened to be $500. Sure, Lester said as he pried the nail loose and handed Little Willie the poster. I'll pick up another at the mayor's office. Lester was skinny but strong, wore a white apron, and talked with saliva on his lips. Gonna be a good one this year. They say the mountain man, the Indian called Stone Fox, might come. Never lost a race, no wonder, with 5 Samoans. But Little Willie wasn't listening as he ran out of the store, clutching the poster in his hand. Thank you, Lester, thank you! Grandfather's eyes were fixed on the ceiling. Little Willie had to stand on his toes in order to position the poster directly in front of Grandfather's eyes. I'll win, Little Willie said. You'll see. They'll never take this farm away. Searchlight barked and put one paw up on the bed. Grandfather closed his eyes, squeezing out a little tear that rolled down and filled up his ear. Little Willie gave Grandfather a big hug, and Searchlight barked again. Chapter 6. Little Willie went to see the mayor, Smiley, at the City Hall building in town to sign up for the race. The mayor's office was large and smelled like hair tonic. The mayor sat in a bright red chair with his feet on his desk. There was nothing on the desk except the mayor's feet. We have a race for you youngsters 1 hour before. Mayor Smiley mopped sweat from his neck with a silk handkerchief, although Little Willie thought it was quite cool in the room. I want to enter the real race, Mr. Mayor. You must be funnin', boy. The mayor laughed twice and blotted his neck anyway. Anyway, there's an entry fee. How much? $50. Little Willie was stunned. That was a lot of money just to enter a race. But he was determined. He ran across the street to the bank. "Don't be stupid," Mr. Foster told Little Willie. "This is not a race for amateurs. Some of the best dog teams in the Northwest will be entering. I have Searchlight. We go fast as lightning." "Really, Mr. Foster?" "We do." Mr. Foster shook his head. "You don't stand a chance of winning." "Yes, we do." "Willie, the money in your savings account is for your college education. You know I can't give it to you." "You have to." "I do. It's my money." Little Willie left the bank with a stack of $10 gold pieces, 5 of them to be exact. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. He walked into the mayor's office and plopped the coins down on the mayor's desk. "Me and Searchlight are going to win that $500, Mr. Mayor. You'll see. Everybody'll see." Mr. Smiley counted the money, wiped his neck, and entered the Little Willie into the race. When Little Willie stepped out of the City Hall building, he felt 10 feet tall. He looked up and down the snow-covered street. He was grinning from ear to ear. Searchlight walked over and stood in front of the sled, waiting to be hitched up, but Little Willie wasn't ready to go yet. He put his thumbs into his belt loops and let the sun warm his face. He felt great. In his pocket was a map Mayor Smiley had given him showing the 10 miles the race covered. Down Main Street, right on North Road, Little Willie could hardly hold back his excitement. 5 miles of the race he traveled every day and knew with his eyes closed. The last 5 miles were back into town along South Road, which was mostly straight and flat. It's speed that would count. Here, and with the lead, it's speed that would count here, and with the lead, he knew he could get in the first 5 miles. Little Willie was sure he could win. As Little Willie hitched Searchlight to the sled, something down at the end of the street came. Moving objects caught his eye. They were difficult to see because they were all white. There were 5 of them, and they were beautiful. In fact, they were the most beautiful Samoyeds Little Willie had ever seen. The dogs held their heads high up proudly and strutted in unison. They pulled a large but lightly constructed sled. They also pulled a large but by no means lightly constructed man. Way down at the end of the street, the man looked normal, but as the sled got closer, the man got bigger and bigger. The man was an Indian, dressed in furs and leather, with moccasins that came all the way up to his knees. His skin was dark, his hair was dark, and he wore a dark-colored headband. His eyes sparkled in the sunlight, but the rest of his face was as hard as stone. The sled came to a stop right next to Little Willie. The boy's mouth hung open as he tilted his head way back to look at the man. Little Willie had never seen a giant before. "Gosh," Little Willie gasped. The Indian looked at Little Willie. His face was solid granite, but his eyes were alive and cunning. "Howdy," Little Willie blurted out, and he gave a nervous smile. But the Indian said nothing. His eyes shifted to Searchlight, who let out a soft moan, but did not bark. The giant walked into the City Hall building. Word that Stone Fox had entered the race spread through the town of Jackson within the hour, and throughout the state of Wyoming within the day. Stories and legends about the awesome mountain man followed shortly. Little Willie heard many of them at Lester's General Store. Was this time in Denver when he snapped a man's back with 2 fingers, said Dusty, the town's troubadour. But nobody believed him, really. Little Willie learned that no white man had ever heard Stone Fox talk. Stone Fox refused to speak with the white man because of the treatment of his people that they had received years ago. His tribe the shoe stone, who were peaceful seed gatherers, had been forced to leave Utah and settle on a reservation in Wyoming with another tribe called the Arapaho. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure how to say that tribe name. I'm going to show it to you. Please forgive me if you're from that family, that tribe. Where was I? Stone Fox's dream was for his people to return to their homeland. Stone Fox was using the money he won from racing to simply buy the land back. He had already purchased 4 farms and over 200 acres. That Stone Fox was smart, all right. In the next week, Little Willy and Searchlight went over the 10-mile track every day until they knew every inch of it by heart. Stone Fox hardly practiced at all. In fact, Little Willy only saw Stone Fox do the course once, and then he sure wasn't going very fast. The race was scheduled for Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. Only 9 sleds were entered. Mayor Smiley had hoped for more contestants, but after Stone Fox had entered, well, you couldn't blame people for wanting to save their own money. It was true, Stone Fox had never lost a race, but Little Willy wasn't worried. He had made up his mind to win, and nothing was going to stop him, not even Stone Fox. All right, friends, well, that's it for today's Read Aloud. I hope you enjoyed these 3 chapters, and I will see you the next time we read the following chapters of Stone Fox. Have a great day, friends. Learn a lot. Bye.